Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Cubase Fundamentals course. We're starting mixing today, and we're going to be mixing the drum kit in this episode. If you're enjoying this series and you want to follow along with this stuff, you can download this project file and have a go at this stuff for yourself. The two ways that you can do that, you can check out the Patreon link in the description below, or alternatively, click join to become a YouTube channel member. I'll make a link to this project to all of my members on both platforms. So as I said, we're going to mix the drums today. And the first thing that I'm going to do is mute everything that isn't a drum. Let's just listen to the kit on its own. We can see immediately there's a problem with the levels. That was just an artifact of what we did last time. We flattened the entire mix, and now the kick and the snare are sending so much signal into the rhythm master bus that it's overloading. So we're going to need to fix that, but that's incredibly simple. We can just arbitrarily reduce all of these volumes and get that under control very quickly. The way that I like to approach mixing is the most important thing is to listen to as much of the song as you possibly can when you're mixing. And there are mixers out there who will literally only mix with the entire song and not mute any tracks. That's way beyond me. My ears aren't that good. I generally like to start with the drums, and I'll boil it right down to a single instrument. I usually start with the kick and then bring it up. But the most important thing is that never mix in isolation when you've got other stuff that's already been mixed. So if you've got your kick sound absolutely smashing and you're really happy with it, generally speaking, don't take it back out. Leave it there all the time, unless you're really listening for specific things, in which case you can take it out of the way temporarily. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to start off with the kick all on its own. Let's get my levels right. So as you can see, signal is way too hot. I'm just going to pull it down a little bit. Now at the moment I'm just doing a static mix. I'm not going to worry about automation. But we've got that kick under some sort of control now. It's no longer peaking. There's the red mark has just disappeared. It's on a kind of timer basis. So I'm going to constrain the drums to a smaller section. And rather than getting too hung up on subjective elements of taste, I just want to show you some of the features in Cubase that are available to you, some of the effects and the methods that are of general value when you're mixing, rather than getting too carried away. Each of the subjects that I'm going to discuss during this mixing process is huge in its own right, and we could spend absolutely ages talking about them. That's not what we're here to do today. And the first thing I'm going to demonstrate is introducing a gate. So if I search for the word gate, and we'll use the Steinberg one. So what this is going to do is it's going to tighten the drum sound up, because what gates do is they say after the volume of the thing that you're listening to drops below a certain level, make it go away. Or alternatively, you can look at it two ways. When the level of the signal exceeds a particular threshold, open the gate and allow the sound to flow. Now we have some presets in the gate that are of value to us. We're going to have a look at these bass drum sounds. So we'll try isolate bass drum 1. And the first thing that I'm going to do is get it running with the gate on, turn it off, and we can A/B between them. Can you hear so the gate's off now, and it's a very wide sound. The bass drum is carrying on for longer than when I turn the gate on. Now preset 2 is more aggressive. If I bring in BD2, you'll really hear it. Now that's too much, frankly, but it's a good demonstration of what's going on. The sound is being very tightly constrained. Now I can represent that visually. Steinberg have another product called SuperVision, which is basically an analyzer. So I'm going to put an instance of SuperVision on the stereo out. I don't think I've ever actually referred during this course to the brick wall limiter. You should always have one of these on your stereo bus. Technically, it should be after the volume slider at the very, very end of your entire chain. And what this does is ensures that if something really horrifically wrong happens with one of your sounds. Let's say there's a plugin called the Arturia Synthy, which is capable of generating internal feedback, and it's horrific. If you get this thing, it is very, very loud and will hurt your ears. If you've got a brick wall limiter at the end of your chain, it means no signal, no matter what the project is doing, can ever exceed this value. It's just a really good safety measure to have one of these things at the end of your chain 100% of the time. It doesn't do any harm. But what we're really here to do is have a look at SuperVision. Lots of different things that SuperVision can represent, but what we want to see in this case is the spectrum curve. And I want to see a mixed down version, which basically means it's going to render two sides of a stereo signal together, so we just see a single wave. And if I head quickly into the settings and pull this peak fall back down, that means that once the graphical curve's been rendered, it gets out of the way very quickly, it falls away very quickly. So now we can see the effect of the gate. If you hover over SuperVision, that blue line is a peak line. It's the loudest thing, and you can see it fading away. I'll just take my cursor out of the way because we're not interested in that. See how quickly that wave is getting out of the way. And there are particularly the loudest three harmonics of the bass drum are just about visible as the sound disappears. If I turn the gate off, you can see them hanging around for much longer. That's the gate. When the gate's on, it's clamping down on that sound and shutting it down quickly. Now it's too aggressive, like I said, so we'll just dial it back in a little bit. What you're also hearing as a matter of interest on this gate is some filtering. This sidechain option down here allows you to apply a filter to the gate as well. If I turn that off, now you're just hearing the effect of the volume attenuation of the gate, and it's no longer applying any filtering. But these presets inside the Steinberg products are great. Don't be afraid to use presets, even if it's just to teach you what all the various settings do. I'm a big believer in playing with the presets to get a good understanding of a plugin, and then you can start tweaking manually yourself. But trying to invent the wheel every time just seems pointless to me. Now, obviously, in the real world, you'd spend a lot longer than that getting your kick drum sound, but let's say that that's good enough for our purposes. And now we're going to introduce the snare drum as well. Just for a moment, and a very brief moment, we'll hear the snare on its own. Get it under control so that it's not clipping. And what I'll use the snare to demonstrate is compression. So we'll head back into our effects inserts again, and this time I'm going to apply a compressor. Just use Steinberg's stock plugin, and I'm going to use the snare compression setting, and this is going to reveal something fairly interesting. I'll get the compressor running. And then turn it off. Did you note a volume difference? I'll turn it back on again. Clearly louder with the compressor on, but rather than taking my word for it, let's use SuperVision to prove that it's louder. Like I say, there's tons of analysis tools in this thing, and this time we're going to use the loudness meter. And what we're interested in is the green signal. Integrated loudness is the total volume over time. So the analyzer listens to everything that you send it, and it gives you a composite total global volume. As a matter of interest, if you're rendering something to Spotify or YouTube, there's a target of -14 loudness units full scale, which is the integrated full scale. So this is the absolute global standard that's used. But for our purposes, we're just going to listen, or we're going to see what SuperVision thinks the level is. We've currently got the compressor on. -24-ish. Just peaking up above -24. Now I'll turn the compressor off, reset the meter, get it running again. Quieter. It's quieter by nearly 3 decibels. So this compressor has increased the overall volume of the sound by 3 decibels. That's going to make it sound better. Loud things sound better. So if you're processing in the mixing, it's all about the quality of the sounds. How is everything fitting together? We want to try to make everything sound as good as it possibly can. And one of the things that you'll discover is that loud things just trick your ears into making you think that they sound fundamentally better. So if we want to get this snare track sounding the same volume whether the compressor's on or off, and that will then enable us to see what the compressor itself is actually doing to the sound, we need to level match. There's multiple different ways that you can do that. For today, I'm going to choose a really easy, kind of brutal way of doing it, which is to turn the compressor's internal makeup gain. It's got this process called makeup, which basically like artificially increases the volume of the compression. I'm going to override the automatic makeup, and I'm going to control it manually. So we want to aim for -27 when the compressor's on. So with no makeup gain whatsoever, the compressor's actually stripping away 2 decibels of volume. Without going into too much detail of what's happening, it's literally squashing the signal, attenuating it, and we're losing 2 decibels of volume. So I'm just going to manually boost the control by a couple of dB. And we should be fairly close to -27 now. That'll do. So now we can really hear the difference between the compressor on and off, and our ears aren't polluted by a volume increase. That to me sounds kind of flat and lifeless. And those snare hits have got more punch with the compression on. Once again, this is a huge subject. You know, we can spend hours and hours talking about compression, but for the purposes of the demo, let's call that done. Now this is where it's essential to bring, I've already spent too long listening to that snare on its own. Obviously I'm demonstrating an effect, but all of this should be in the context of everything else that's been mixed already. So let's bring the kick back in. You hear how those snares are kind of out of control when the compressor's not on. And now they're just being tightened up. They're behaving themselves. Compression is a behavior tool. It makes things be more orderly and controllable. And we want control in our mix fundamentally. Not even going to bother with the toms because they're so tiny, it's not worth bothering with. But let's have a look at the hi-hats next, see what we can do with them. Firstly, again, just purely solo. Let's hear them on their own. Not the best hi-hats ever, are they? But, you know, they're okay. Let's try to control some of those frequencies. There's kind of a nasty nasal thing going on with the hats that I want to control. So I'm going to head into my equalizer. First thing that I can do is throw all the low frequencies away. So I've introduced a low shelf here. You can see that the low band of the parametric EQ built into Cubase defaults to low shelf, so I'm perfectly happy with that. The hi-hats are not interested in those low frequencies. We don't want them getting anywhere near the kick drum or the snare, so I'm just throwing them all away. But there's something fairly unpleasant going on around 2K. then I'm going to use an EQ to try to hunt down and take it away. Q is the sharpness of the curve that I'm cutting out. That's the nastiness. And then let's say we want to boost some of the upper frequencies. Let's find where the hats sound at their best. Turn the EQ off so that we can hear what we've just done. Yeah, that kind of nasal thing, which has just been cut out. I'm not going to bore you by saying that we could spend 2 hours doing that as well. Damn, I just did. Let's call that done. Now let's bring the cymbals in. Have a listen to them on their own. So big frequency filling sound. When we look at this in the spectrum analyzer, there's going to be, you know, tons and tons of stuff going on. Yeah, huge range. And that's going to cause a problem for masking, because the whole principle of mixing is that you want each sound to have its own place in the mix. If you've got everything everywhere, everything becomes a mush. So what we're really trying to do is pull away the stuff that we don't want, accentuate the stuff that we do want, and bring it all to a harmonious whole. And I'm obviously doing it really, really quickly, primarily to show you the interface. That's the most important thing for today. So we'll bring all the other stuff back in. Get it centered reasonably well in the mix. Throw all that low stuff away. And have a bit of a play with the EQ. And let's call that done. Now the problem with the hats and the cymbals coexisting is that they're both doing a very similar job. So a really easy way to get around that is to separate them. Let's put the hi-hats more over to the left-hand side, the cymbals more over to the right-hand side, see what that gives us. Immediately hear that separation, the sound suddenly becomes much more interesting. Now you try to avoid pan processing until you get to the mixing stage, but it's an absolutely fundamental tool when you do come to mixing, because it's one of the dimensions that we have to play with to make sure that these frequencies aren't stepping all over each other. The only two things we've got left to do in this really, really simple drum setup are the two global sounds. The overheads in the room we're hearing the entire drum kit. Let's hear the overheads first. So this is literally a microphone suspended above the drum kit, which is why you're hearing everything. And you can hear, you know, the snare's pretty loud. You can hardly hear the bass drum at all. What it's doing is adding thickness and depth to the drum sound. So we don't want very much of this because it completely subverts all the stuff we've done previously, but we do want a little bit. So what I'm going to do is start off with the volume down at nothing and see if it enriches the sound as we bring the overheads in. this is becoming very subtle now, but since we were given an overhead mix and we've introduced it, then it has added an extra dimension and thickness to the overall effect. Exactly the same going on with the room. Now it's all bass drum and snare. And there's very little point in using pan on your overheads or the room, because the whole point is that it's supposed to be a holistic sound. So unless you're going for something really dramatic, way out there, I prefer to leave my overheads and rooms central. Now this isn't going to be a huge effect because we've hardly done any processing on the drums, but I'll show you how you can enable and disable all of the insert effects simultaneously. Just open the mix console. I'm going to left click on the leftmost drum, press my shift key, choose all of the drums, enter Q-Link, and now if I turn the insert on and off, it disables all of the inserts for the entire drum bank. And as I say, you're going to hear very little difference because the changes that we made with these gates and compressors were subtle, but it's a demonstration of an effect. You can hear that compressor on the snare particularly. I think that'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please hit the like button. It helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. I'll see you next time.